And we are live. So welcome back to the Get Your Shit Together live show. And today I am joined with the ever wonderful, the ever amazing Jemma Bevans, who is the owner, I believe, of Social Gems. And
if you can say things like that about me, I will get a big head and I won't be able to get out of that door. You know that, right?
Do you know what? If you can't get out the door, you have to stay here chatting with me. Win-win, win-win. But Jemma has kindly given up some of her time to have a chat to me about something that is incredibly near and dear to my heart. Something that impacts so many people around the world. It impacts 1.25 million people just in the UK alone. But Jemma is here to tell her story about how she overcame an eating disorder. So welcome. How are you today? And thank you for coming along.
I'm all right, to be fair. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing good today. I have a few issues with my boiler. I've had no hot water for about 2 days. I was planning not to come back in until Friday. So, you know, having cold showers always a fun time to be in.
It wakes up in the morning.
I know. I've just like woke up. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm awake now. Who needs coffee when you've got cold showers, eh?
Exactly.
Well, anyway, so thank you so much for coming along. So anyone that's watching this live, feel free to ask a question, get involved in the conversation, because it is really something that is an important topic. So like I said, this is something that's near and dear to my heart. And I don't even think you would know this, Jem, but you started sharing your story, or I started seeing you share your story about overcoming an eating disorder when you started talking about the Seeds Eating Disorder charity. And I think you were talking quite a bit with Jemma Oten, I think is how you pronounce her name. But that actually helped me and encouraged me to talk more about my story. But with an eating disorder, it's something that I've actually shied away from before. I've spoken about so many other things in my life, but the eating disorder element I kind of shied away from talking about. But you've given me the courage to talk more about it. So thank you so much for sharing your story.
Actually makes me feel really good, to be fair. As long as it encourages one person to actually step up and say something about it, then it's good to post, because it's helping people more.
Oh, Jemma has gone. I'm guessing there's something happened with the internet. So you guys just have me today at the moment until Jemma jumps back in. When she jumps back in, I will absolutely get her to be coming live again. There she is. Let me add you. There we go.
It just completely knocked you off my screen.
Oh, no, that's okay. You jumped up. Everyone just had me for just 1 minute, but that's okay.
It was literally, I just caught my mouse in my hand as I went like that, and it just shot everything off my screen. I was like,
that's Max for you when you have the little touch mouse, right?
And it works so much. It works so well for everything else as well, usually.
Just not when you're doing lives. So we were just saying that you have encouraged me to talk about my journey through an eating disorder, and I think that you sharing your story is something that's really important. My first question for you, and it's something that I'm really fascinated by, because obviously it's taken me a long time to talk about it, but what gave you the courage and what made you want to talk about sharing your journey through an eating disorder?
So with me, my mum and dad are foster parents. So my mum and dad did 32 years of adoptive babies and children with disabilities. Wow. When those children used to come to our house, sometimes there'd be children of the age of like 4 and 5, things like that. Really unusual situation. They don't know people in the house. They're a little bit scared. So I was always the one that was used to help those kids feel better. Now, I don't know how much you actually know about my background as a whole. I'm adopted myself. My real parents tried to kill me at birth. So my foster parents, or they're my adoptive parents, to be fair, used to utilize my stories to try and help other people. So I've always been taught there's a lot of power in speaking about how you feel about things. So I've always talked about everything that I've gone through anyway. The main reason I started talking about it on LinkedIn was Jemma. So one of my contacts, a guy called David Bowe, has known me for a great number of years. He's insurance to recruitment. To the recruitment sector. I used to sell payroll. So we used to help each other out quite a lot, went to quite a lot of networking events together. And he just dropped me a message saying, Jemma is doing this, and I think it's something that you'd want to get involved in. I haven't mentioned like what you've been through to her, because obviously that's your story and it's something that you have to share if you want to, but I just thought I'd bring it to your attention. And that's kind of where it came from. It's one of those that if you are going to start talking about it, promoting it, and getting people to get involved, and you wanting people to give up essentially their hard-earned cash to support that, you kind of need to give a bit of weight to that as well. And that's one of the main reasons I actually shared my story online.
Yeah.
I probably don't talk about eating problems and my past as much as I should. And one of the main reasons for that is fear of upsetting other people.
Yeah, it's a big one. Yeah, I mean, the reason why I don't always share my story is because I'm actually a qualified nutritionist, and I was quite embarrassed and quite ashamed of the fact that I was a nutritionist and had an eating disorder, even though when I had my eating disorder, I was very young. I was between 15 and 22. I actually suffered for 7 years. But it's also something that, for me, it's something that's really misunderstood, and it's something that is upsetting for a lot of people, and a lot of people actually suffer with it. So you're right. I don't want to upset people, but I was also quite embarrassed because I'm a freaking nutritionist, and I was still struggling with it when I was going through my university, and it was really, really challenging, and I thought people might judge me. And I think the problem that I have with eating disorders is they are really misunderstood. And I don't know if you've got the same feelings about it, but for me, everyone thought it was because I really wanted to be skinny. In my head, I'm like, no, that was just a symptom. That wasn't actually like the cause of it. That's a symptom of it for me anyway. But yeah, I think that talking about it is super, super important to just give other people a voice. And I really love what you said there about, everyone has a story, and actually stories give us power. And the power behind a story can actually change so many things if you share it. So I think that that's really important. But so what I really want to know, I actually knew a little bit about your background. I knew you had been adopted. I actually saw another podcast that you were on, and I cannot remember for the life of me whose it was. But you were
Connell, to be fair.
It might have been. Yeah, it might have been. I'm not quite sure. But you talked about being adopted and your biological parents treating you incredibly poorly, trying to kill you, and then your foster parents adopting you and you actually using that story. So when we talk about the eating disorder, when did it start coming up for you? How did it come up for you? Because I always say eating disorders are insidious. They feel like they come out of nowhere, but they're always just sort of growing, and they growing in the background.
So with me, it was accumulation of things. So it started around 16-ish. I was a chunky kid, I'm not going to lie. I was a proper puppy fat teenager. Never really bothered me. I was always quite happy in my own skin. Odd person said, oh, you're a bit chunky. Again, water for duck's back when it comes to me. However, my sister died when I was quite young. My grandma died when I was quite young. There was lots of different things like that had kind of happened in my life that I couldn't control. It was all about control for me. I felt like I couldn't control elements of my life, but I could control the intake of food. So I exactly the same as you, 16 to 23. The only thing that actually fixed me, so I had years of therapy while I was at university. My dad was also diagnosed with terminal cancer while I was at uni as well, which I got worse for a while before I got better. But it's one of those things that the therapy that I went through, the help that I was given didn't really help. Actually becoming pregnant and knowing that there was a small person growing inside me and that the intake of my food could potentially affect their life massively affected me and made me change my ways.
So that was the one thing that you sort of were like, okay, cool, like wake up story, like wake up time. I've got to change. I've got to, fix this because I've got a little tiny human growing inside me.
Which was, don't get me wrong, it was hard. There was still times where I was actually sick. I'd binge eat and then I'd throw tons up. Then I'd sit there crying for half an hour about it and then go and eat something again. Because that I've just took that from that little person that's growing inside me, basically.
Yeah. And I think that that's something that a lot of people don't really understand, that eating disorders are incredibly hard to overcome because it's not like, an addiction of some sort where you just don't, you get rid of all your friends and or whatever that, you don't hang out with those people anymore and you stop surrounding yourself with those things. Food, you have to have it. And it's like every mealtime is a struggle and it's a challenge to overcome it. But what I'm hearing with your story is that you've actually had a lot of trauma. You've had a lot of things that you've had to overcome. You've had to be incredibly resilient, you know, from just a wee young lass up until you were, you know, probably up until recently as well. You've probably had to overcome a lot of things, you know, having your dad have terminal cancer or cancer, you know, a lot of things going on as well. Do you actually think that a lot of your childhood impacted the way that you developed an eating disorder? Because obviously I always say eating disorders are a symptom. I don't say that there's usually something else that's underneath it.
Yeah, so with me, I think a lot of it did stem back to what had happened to me. So when I was newborn, so I wasn't very old. I can't remember any of it. I did have recurring nightmares up to the age of about 8 or 9, where the nightmares were all around somebody trying to protect me and someone getting hurt because of protecting me. So obviously it was always an underlying thing that I never really understood. And yeah, like the scars all over my body from like the things that they did. And it was kind of shame around that. I think a lot of it was me not understanding who I am and what I'd been through. I kind of just put it to the back of my head and tried to ignore it. But things like that tend to have a way of rearing the little ugly heads and telling you, no, I'm still here.
Yeah.
So probably the most honest thing I can actually say to you is over the last few months or so, I have put myself back into therapy. I am paying for it myself. And one of the main reasons for that is middle of last year, I was on a Zoom call and my left-hand side of my face just dropped. So they thought I'd had a stroke, so I got dragged into hospital. And it turns out I've got something called a vein of Galen malformation, which is my arteries and my capillaries. My arteries and my veins are connected through my brain, but not through my capillaries. So I've got like a slow blood flow, and all of a sudden I'll get a short, sharp injection, which causes my heart rate to go through the roof. That's all interlinked to everything that happened to me in the brain trauma as a baby. And I got really angry. And my real mum, if I can use that term, I don't particularly believe it's the right one, actually messaged me on Facebook when I was about 25. And after all that had gone on and I was in and out of hospital, I opened up the message that she'd sent me and I wrote out about 15, 20 different responses that were pretty vile. I'm not going to lie. A proud moment of mine. But obviously I didn't send the message. I left it. But obviously going through the whole process and wanting to do something like that made me realize that I've not actually dealt with those demons. So I'm now trying to
deal with them.
Yeah, because it's just easier to put everything to back of your mind, isn't it? But when you put everything to the back of your mind and put it in Pandora's box, it's always got a way of releasing itself. And then when I start thinking about stuff like that, that's usually when my eating's its worst. I've got this underlying feeling where I've got this urge to purge and I just want to eat everything in sight with I want to throw it up afterwards. There's no, I just want to eat all this. The whole thought process of that is I'm going to do this to do that.
So it's literally I'm feeling anxious. So your anxiety spikes the eating binges. So you had binge eating bulimia is what I'm hearing from what you're saying with an eating, because there's multiple. And I think that's something for the people that are watching, there's multiple different types of eating disorders. There's like anorexia, there's binge purge, there's bulimia, they're all different types. But at the end of the day, they still cause a lot of trauma to whoever it is in varying degrees. So it's, there's multiple different types, and a lot of the times it does get triggered by anxiety. That was my side. I had severe anxiety, and the one way that I was able to manage my anxiety was to not eat. I found that was way easier for me than anything else. So what I'm hearing is that your anxiety spikes, and then those thought process that come into your head. And I think something that's really hard to explain if you haven't had an eating disorder is you do have this voice inside your head that does feel like it's telling you things, and you're like, you feel crazy, but you're not. It's just something that's part of it. And it's really hard to describe if you've not had one. An eating disorder, that is. So you have that. So even do you still have those thoughts today? Because I know you said you popped yourself back into therapy last year or this year?
This year. But I have put myself back into therapy. I still have those thoughts, but I put it at rest. I kind of sit there and go, yeah, that's happening. And I try and switch it off, try and ignore it. And I know that it's just because of certain ways I'm thinking and feeling at that moment in time that that's why it's there. The bizarre thing that probably most people don't understand, and especially for me, is how to keep that little voice at bay. So when it's bizarre, it kind of goes off and you're like, right, okay, I need to do this. And then you eat loads of stuff. And it's like when you're throwing up, it's like you're throwing up all those words.
Yeah.
It feels like in your head. And that probably makes me sound like I'm absolutely crazy. But that tends to work. I've also found that high intensive training, interval training, basically has the same impact on me. So actually spending 15 minutes doing press ups, planking, and getting your body to a point where it's physically shaking has that same impact as throwing up. So I try and do something else, or I can't think of word I need right now. I try and
like it's a distraction in a way. It's like it's a positive distraction to sort of not have those negative thoughts, or to utilize those negative thoughts in a different way.
Yeah, and then on top of that, like with oh god, I've completely lost my train of thought, and I'm proper just mumbling now. Yeah, so like the working out, that helps massively. It helps put those little voices at bay. You do have them in the back of your head.
Mm-hmm.
And it is just learning how to deal with that. And actually, do you know what? I'm not crazy. This does happen to more people than me. And I think one of the most important key things that I actually want to get across on this podcast today is you don't have to be thin to have an eating disorder.
That is a massive one. Do you know, I saw a news article a couple of weeks ago, and this actually was one of, it actually made me reach out to you, was a girl was denied help because her BMI wasn't low enough. And I actually had a really similar issue when I was going through my eating disorder. My BMI was really low, like I was very, very small. But because I hadn't lost my periods, I wasn't allowed to get this type of help, because they said that you had to have lost your periods, your menstrual cycles, to being able to have access to help. And when you're going through that, you already feel like you're not good enough. And you're like, I'm not even good enough for treatment. It's like, I'm not even sick enough to get that treatment. And there has to be a huge change in that. Like, that's something that I've got to say, like the BMI and the physical side to mental health, that the eating disorders, you can't treat it that way. You've got to treat it like it's a mental health issue. You can't treat it like it's a physical issue.
Completely agree. And I had exactly the same problem. So I'd moved home. Me and my boyfriend at the time had actually split up because of my eating problems, because my moods were all over the place.
Yeah.
I can't honestly blame him for leaving me. I'd have left me too. But I moved back home. Obviously, I was still doing it, probably more so than I was before, based on the fact that, to me, as a 19-year-old girl, it's pretty traumatic, splitting up with your boyfriend. My mum saw like sick and things around the toilet, because obviously I'd not cleaned it properly. Sat down and had a conversation with me, which was probably one of the most hardest conversations I've ever had to have in my life. She then forced me to go to the doctors. We went to the doctors and they were like, well, what are you on about? You weigh 9 stone. I'm 5'10". I'm quite a tall person. 9 stone is small for me. And he went, well, you're not underweight, so I don't really understand why you're here. As a teenager, I was very, very loud, very outspoken, and I didn't take any shit ever. So literally just stood up and went, oh, well, it's okay, innit, what I'm doing then. Obviously, if my BMI is all right and I weigh 9 stone, it's fine. I'll just go home and carry on doing what I'm doing then, shall I? Whilst my mum's basically sat there going, Jemma, please sit down. Please, just like, we can talk through this. Just calm down. But because I'd left myself so vulnerable in my eyes, and someone had gone, there is nothing wrong with you, it made me put my back up, and change my views towards therapy. So I did have therapy afterwards. I'm not going to lie and say it happened straight away. It was an 8-month process, on a waiting list. And then when I did actually manage to get to see someone, the guy he put my back up straight away. He went, well, what's wrong with you? And I went, well, where do you want me to start? And he went, well, beginning would be a good idea.
He gave you attitude.
He gave me attitude. So my response was, well, I was born in Pontefract Hospital in 1988. I'm not entirely sure how much I weighed because I'm adopted. My real parents tried to kill me. How much of this do you want to actually know? And yeah, it wasn't a good experience. I went for a couple of years. I can't say I went because it helped. I went because it helped other people around me knowing that I was doing something like that. And basically told everybody I'd been discharged and just discharged myself.
Wow. Yeah. So that's something that I think is really important to touch on, is the people that it impacts around you. So for me, I never got access to therapy. No judgment to my parents at all. They just didn't have the knowledge, and it was something where it made them so uncomfortable. They didn't know how to talk to me about it. So it was kind of like swept under the rug, but you could see the pain that it was causing on my family. And I wanted to get better for myself and for them, but you're also trying not to make them feel crappy about it. And you have this like epic guilt and shame for having this eating disorder, and you're like, it must be my fault. I wish I wasn't like this. And you just feel so bad. But it's really tough when you're trying, like for you were trying to get better for the people around you. You weren't trying to get better for you because you didn't have a good experience with therapy. And that's something that's really important to also discuss, that I'm a big, big advocate for therapy. Like I'm a huge advocate for therapy. I've had therapy myself, and I always say it's a really good thing to have. We shouldn't, saying that all therapy is crap is a wrong thing to say. However, massive disclaimer, not all therapists are created equal, and not all therapists are going to be able to help you with what you're looking for. And just because you've had one bad experience with a therapist doesn't necessarily mean that therapy is crappy. But it is really hard when you're a vulnerable person and you go and get therapy and they give you attitude, and you don't feel like someone's going to help you with that.
No, I agree. I mean, the guy I see now is perfect. And I honestly, I'd probably add to that. You might have to go through about 3 or 4 different therapists to find the person for you. And it doesn't necessarily mean that person is not a good therapist.
Mm-hmm.
Personality fits. And in every element of life, personality fits will always play a part.
Yeah, and I think that's huge. I think for me, I went through a couple of therapists until I found the guy that I ended up finding, and it just felt right, and I just gelled well with that therapist, and it was really easy just to have that conversation. Because here's the thing, if you don't feel comfortable, you have to be vulnerable through therapy. There's no way you're going to be you're going to say things that you wouldn't ever say to anyone else, and you have to say those things. And if you don't feel like that person's not going to judge you, or you feel judged, or you don't feel like that person's really listening to you, it's going to be really challenging for you to open up. And again, like you said, it's not necessarily about that therapist is a bad therapist. It's just you don't gel well with them, and that's completely fine, and that's just normal.
Well, different personalities fit with different personalities, and that's always going to play a part in anything, even in your buying decisions. When you're looking to buy new products and services, not every person is going to get on with every person. The therapist I use has got crazy bands that works so well for me, because I'm one of those people that I'm under, if you don't laugh, you'll cry. And I'd rather talk about things that I'm vulnerable about in a humorous way, because it's taking away its power. And that's what works well when I'm trying to talk about things. My therapist works in a similar way. The reason I actually met my therapist was because of the work I was doing with Seed, and them talking to me about the eating problems that they had. This was a man. So that's another thing that we can actually break as a stigma on here as well. Most people automatically assume that eating disorders is only linked to women. It's not. You'll find that Mr. Joe Bloggs, who lives 3 doors down, who gets up every morning at 5 o'clock in the morning to go to the gym for 2 hours, and then goes back to the gym for another 2 hours before he comes home, has probably got some form of eating disorder himself as well. It's not just I want to do this, it's becoming an obsession.
Yeah.
And you're constantly thinking about, this is what I need to do, this is what I need to be, this is how I need to look. It is going to become an obsession over time. So when you're actually looking at things like nutrition, healthy eating, healthy lifestyles, I'll be honest, it's my main bugbear of why things like Herbalife and things like that exist. It's promoting bad eating problems. It's promoting poor eating habits. And it's not good. I mean, I know what I'm like. And at the moment, I have put weight on through lockdown. I'm not happy with the way I look. So I'm working out. I haven't changed my eating habits, because if I start changing my eating habits and looking into calories, I'm going to get poorly again. I'm going to get upset again. I don't have scales in my house, because I know if there's scales in my house, regardless of whether I want to or not, I will weigh myself at least 4 or 5 times a day, because it's there. There's little things like that you need to do when you have an eating disorder to protect yourself and to stop yourself from actually having things like that happen to you again. If it is something that you've noticed is a trigger, remove that trigger.
That's what I always say whenever I'm looking at myself, I'm like, that's triggering me, remove it. It's easier to do it that way. And so it's really interesting. I've actually got, it's not a diet plan, but it's kind of a diet plan, but it's called calling bullshit on your diet plan, which is pretty much calling out all of the shitty, toxic information that's out there. I always talk about PT peeps. So, the ones that are always like lose 60 pounds in 30 days. I'm like, that is so toxic. You're going to end up with an eating disorder. It's starvation. And it's not healthy for you at all. And I'm always looking at if anyone's listening to this and you want to know a good diet plan to follow, if they talk about your mindset and your mental health, probably listen to them, because it's all about, that's where it starts. It's not about the foods that you eat. It's not necessarily about the diet that you have. It's nothing about that. It's actually getting a better understanding of who you are and bettering your mindset and your mental health surrounding that, and managing certain elements with that. Screw the calorie counting and the diet that you're on and whatever. Like, I get asked crazy questions because I am a nutritionist. It's like, what do you think about this diet? What do you think about that diet? And it's just like, well, what do you want? Like, what's your pain point? Like, why are you wanting to do it? And then it's understanding that what you're trying to do for you don't want to change your diet. That's fine. If you just want to go with exercise, that's also completely fine. You've got to find what works for you. And here's the other thing is as well, not every treatment plan is going to be the same when it comes to eating disorders, because they're all different people. All our triggers might be different as well. So I think that's a huge one as well. But here's something that I really wanted to sort of break down a little bit more is getting back to you wanting to get better for everyone around you, which is kind of really ingenuous. But what I want to understand is, how did your family react to you? What were the conversations that you were having with your family around your eating disorder?
To be honest, my mum was guilt more than anything else.
Oh, yeah.
And I do really feel for her. And it did probably, I'm going to cry. It did probably hurt her a lot. And that never was my intention, but my mum was a big lady. And she did used to say things like, nobody will love you if you're not thin. She didn't mean that aimed towards us in any way, shape or form. It's how she felt about herself. But as young girls, we kind of didn't understand that. So because of her own viewpoints around food and her own weight, she felt like she was to blame. My mum did try and change people around me to some extent. So it's probably going to sound horrific, and it was never meant that way. My dad's a proper Yorkshire guy, flat cap, whippet, pigeons, you name it. That was literally my dad. But he always had that funny, quirky sense of humour. And if we put a couple of pounds on, we'd walk past him and he'd be like, "It must be jelly because jam doesn't shake like that." And we'd kind of giggle at him, and it was always like kind of light humour. But then my mum started ripping my dad apart for saying stuff like that to us because of the impact, and there was never any impact in it. And it that upset me more than anything, because it made me feel like my parents felt the need to change who they were because of me. And they didn't. It was nothing to do with them. It was all issues that I had with myself.
Yeah. And that's a big one. So I think the guilt, shame and blame aspect comes into play. And I actually talk a lot about this. It's really interesting because Jemma Bevan, who I'm speaking to, Jemma Oaten, came out and did a video about the guilt, shame, blame game, which is just, it happens in all different varying degrees across everyone's life. But when you have an eating disorder, usually the parents are either blaming themselves or they're blaming each other, or even yourself, like you feel like it's your fault. You feel like you deserve it. So therefore this is what you're suffering with. And you feel guilty because you're looking at your family and your friends going like, "I'm so sorry I'm like this way. I don't want to be this way, but I'm so sorry." So you feel guilt, they feel guilt. And here's the thing that what I really liked what Jemma was saying, there's no guilt in this. There should be no guilt or shame in this. It's just something that happens, and it's something it's a mental health issue. And I think that that's something that I really want to get across. And I think that a lot of people think it's a physical health issue. Well, it impacts the physical. It's a mental health issue. It stems from the mental health element. So it's like anything, it's really challenging. And for instance, you yourself said your background probably played quite a big role in that. So I have a bit of a question about that. I'm going to jump back to that. When did you find out what your biological parents, I know you couldn't find the right name for your parents, but your biological parents, when did you find out about that as a kid, what they did to you?
To be honest, the usual term I use when not on film is rent a womb. But
you can use it, that's all good.
But to be honest, oh God, this is going to sound horrific. I found out off one of my friends at school. So
how did your friend at school know?
Her mum and my mum were best friends.
Oh.
She'd assumed that my mum had already had that conversation with me. My sister had died of cancer about 6 months previous. So it wasn't something that my mum had wanted to broach. She didn't ever want to really talk about it, to be fair. If you mention anything to do with rent a womb or any parents, because two out of the 6 of us are adopted, worked up, and she starts to cry because to her we're hers and we don't come from anywhere else. So actually, like, talking about that side really does hurt her, and we try not to mention it too much. But yeah, so one of my friends at school, in typical schoolyard, to be fair, you're adopted. No, I'm not. Yeah, you are. Ask your mum. And it took me a week to ask my mum. I was about 10, 11-ish.
Wow.
Around that. Might have been a little bit younger. I because of everything that happened, like grandma dying, sister dying, brother going away and never coming back, and then finding out we're adopted, everything's a little bit of a blur from that kind of era.
That's a lot to take in at that's a lot to take in at any age, but as a 10, 11-year-old, you're just trying to figure out who you are and you're trying to get a handle on that. And then to find out all of those bits of information, that's got to be, like, I can understand why it's a bit of a blur. It makes sense.
Yeah, to be honest with me, it was literally my sister had died. I didn't understand what had happened. I didn't understand where she was, and I didn't understand how to make my mum and dad feel better. It broke them for a while. I can't say it didn't. It was their eldest daughter that they lost. It's going to break anyone.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I found out that way. I found out exactly what had happened to me when I was 18, when I was given all the newspaper articles and things on what had been said and what had been done. When I found out, I didn't react very well. My parents actually live quite local. They're in neighbouring villages. I knew about this, obviously, because my mum had mentioned it to me. And I was very much heading out the front door with a baseball bat. My mum was like, this is why we didn't want to tell you until you're 18. We know you're a little bit of a firecracker. But if you kind of go out and do this, Jem, you know better than them.
Yeah.
And I kind of went, yeah, do you know what? She's got a point. Admittedly, my initial reaction was, well, they can defend themselves. I couldn't. So I'm not as bad as them. And she was like, come on, Jem, really? And I'm like, okay, I'm literally just trying to find a way to justify it in my own head the way I'm feeling. The reason I was so angry, I'll be honest, is I was taken into Pontefract Hospital, broken ribs. A letter was sent to social services saying that they thought I was in danger. The reason I'd been taken to hospital by my grandma, not my parents, had been because I wasn't eating. So every time they fed me a bottle, I threw it straight back up. I threw it back up because I've got broken ribs and fractured ribs. So they sent a letter to the social services. That letter got lost in the post and I went back with them.
Wow.
So they grabbed me by my ankles. I was about 3 months old and smashed my head against a brick wall. I've got like black permanent bruises on my knees, on the bottoms of my back. I've got scars across the front of my stomach. The flipping camera's weird. So I don't know if you can see it, but I've actually got like scars in my hair line.
Yeah.
Because I had to have tubes to drain fluid from my brain. I was supposed to not survive. If I did survive, I was supposed to be brain damaged. So I had to do tests to prove that I was intelligent enough to go to a normal school. That kind of all happened. And it did upset me for a long time. The thing that upset me more than anything else is that they only served a month and a half in prison each. Because they were 18 and 19 and classed as immature. At the time, I was 18 years old. My mum was a foster parent and had helped to bring up a hell of a lot of babies.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of babies, from babies with broken arms, so they were in pain, so they cried a lot. Babies whose parents who'd been crack addicts, so there were babies that were addicted to crack who screamed for 4 weeks on end, non-stop. And not at any point did I ever feel the need to hurt that baby, regardless of how upset or tired or angry or emotional I was, because I was a teenager myself. So I don't understand the justification for that.
Yeah. And then I can, like, you know,
I still don't.
I don't think anyone can understand that kind of behavior unless you're those people. Like, I don't think that there's, in my mind, there's no justification, but here, like, I don't, like, you know, I don't know, but there's no justification in my mind either. And I can understand why you don't understand that. And I can understand why you were really angry. It makes complete sense. Like, you're sitting here going, like, I'm surrounded by children who have come from a really, really tough background like myself. And I don't, and you obviously they're in pain, they're crying, they're screaming, they've probably got behavioral issues, they've probably got their own trauma going on as well, which is going to change the way you behave anyway. You know, trauma changes the way you behave on any day. Yeah, and for you to be able to have the empathy to go, I just couldn't do that. I can understand why that would be confusing, and that is really, you know, I can understand why you were so angry while you're walking out of your house with a baseball bat. You know, I can completely understand why you were so angry and frustrated.
I can say, though, although I don't understand that mentality, I have since learnt, since having my own child, that it's not something that was ever wrong with me. It was something that they were lacking as individuals. Which helped.
And, you know, at the end of the day, it's, you know, I can understand if you went through the process in your brain going, it must have been something that I did, it must have been me, and blaming yourself because it happened to you. And that can be really confusing. However, it happened to you. It wasn't you, if that makes sense. It wasn't because of you. And I think that having that to go, you know what, it had nothing to do with me. Clearly, it was them that had the issue. You know, it's you know, shifting that responsibility. And I think sometimes if you are somebody that tries to take on all the responsibility, go, it must have been me, you're trying to make yourself better, which is not always a bad thing. But if you take it to the extreme, which is there are certain things that aren't your fault, there are certain things that had nothing to do with you, it has something to do with somebody else, it can actually cause a lot of internal conflict with that. But learning to be able to sort of separate yourself from that situation can be really important. It sounds like you've gotten to that point right now. So we fast forward, you were able to overcome an eating disorder. Again, 7 years. I don't know what it is with the 7 years mark where I don't know if you did this. I did very similar to you. I didn't have a child, but I woke up and was like, I really can't keep doing this anymore. This is just, it's like, I remember that day like it was yesterday when I woke up and I'd been suffering for 7 years with my own eating disorder. And I was just to the point where I was just so over it. I was so sick and tired of it. You know, it was kind of hard because I asked for help when I was 18, 19 and didn't get the help that I needed. So I suffered it again for another 3 years or something like that. And then I just woke up one day and was like, I can't do this to myself anymore. Like, I can't live like this. I just don't want to live like this anymore. And it's not, I mean, it sounded easy. It wasn't easy. Like, cause you know, after that, I still had to overcome all of that kind of, the voice and all that kind of stuff that we spoke a little bit earlier about. But you had a little baby in there to help you sort of, well, kind of give you that support that you needed to be able to overcome your eating disorder. So you had, is your son's name Charlie?
Charlie is 8 now, to be fair. And if I'm completely honest with you, if it wasn't for Charlie, I wouldn't be here today. I found out about Charlie about 6 months after my dad had died, and I wasn't in a good place. I was constantly in and out of hospital, and that was usually stress related. I didn't know how to carry on without my dad. My dad's pride was what I'd always worked for. Always. My dad was my hero. So when he left, my sister died when I was 8 as well. And when my sister died when I was 8, she was like my mum more than my sister, because there's a 2-year age gap between us. My adoptive parents were never supposed to be able to adopt me. My mum's in her 80s now. My dad would have been 85. Essentially, they have like an age gap on when you can adopt people, because obviously looking after kids and what you're going to be like. Obviously, because most people assumed that I was going to be brain damaged, nobody wanted me, so they let my adoptive parents, my foster parents, keep me. So it's a really close relationship with my sister. That broke me. I had to refine myself again from a really young age. And my dad died, and I was like, what the fuck do I do now? I was supposed to be doing my management training through Calf and Warehouse, which is where I worked at the time. That all went out of the window because it was literally every other week I was in hospital. It was only when I got older I realised that that was all interlinked to the fact of the grief with my dad.
Mm-hmm.
I found out I was having Charlie, and it kind of gave me a new purpose in life. I had someone else's pride to work for. I had to make sure someone else was proud of me as their mum.
That's intense. That's, that is really intense. And something that you said there, which was understanding the impact that stress has on the body and the mind, is also really important. So stress, grief, it's not linear. It will hit you in different ways, and everyone's going to react differently. Some people will react physically, some people will react emotionally, and it's just, stress is one of the biggest causes of majority of the health issues that are out there right now, whether it's mental or physical as well. So stress is a massive one, and managing your stress and your grief, because obviously there's a lot of stress when it comes to grief as well, is super, super important. And, it's really interesting. You said, looking back now, it's just the stress of everything. And that makes complete sense. It makes complete sense. Stress will change the way you perceive things.
Oh, massively. And I was constantly, I mean, don't get me wrong, I had a cyst in my ovaries, but a cyst in your ovaries does not put you in hospital every other week. It's painful. It's not that painful.
Yeah. I think that, I've told my story about me burning out multiple times. I've told my story about my health issues where I've had like stomach issues where I spent like 30,000 Australian dollars trying to figure out what's wrong with me. I had like issues with my periods to the point where I was in hospital because I couldn't keep down painkillers because I was in so much pain. All of that, when I look back on it, that was all stress related, because the minute I managed my stress, all those issues kind of just disappeared. So stress is absolutely a big, big element when it comes to a lot of health and well-being. And it's not just physical, it's mental and emotional as well. So being able to actually understand the impact that stress has is super, super important. And honestly, I crap on about it all the time in my business. It's emphasizing why my business is called Get Your Shit Together, literally and figuratively. It's all about understanding the impact that stress has on the body and the mind.
It is important, and unless like there's things where you're like, I feel ill, I feel like I'm going to be sick, oh my god, I've got flu-like symptoms, and those flu-like symptoms can actually be stress related. It can be the fact that you've worked yourself up into a stupor, you have made yourself ill.
Yep.
And a lot of people don't understand that.
No, they don't. And I think that it's easier I remember when I was really sick, like really, really sick, not with my eating disorder, but with just like digestive issues, sleep issues. Like I had cold sores all across my face where I looked like Shrin Baratheon from Game of Thrones. Like it was intense. I was sincerely sick. I was like 26 years old, couldn't walk up and down stairs because my joints were so swollen. And I remember like in my head just thinking like, oh, I would rather them find something physically wrong with me so I didn't have to deal with the stress and the mental health side. And I knew it, maybe not completely consciously, but in my head, I wanted something to be wrong with me to make life easier. But it doesn't actually sort of facing it going, you know what, I'm really stressed out. Why am I really stressed out? I'm really anxious. Why am I really anxious? What's going on? And getting the help that you needed, hands down, will be very, very beneficial. And like we've already said, it's a journey to get there sometimes, but it's really, really important. So coming back to working with Jemma Oaten, who is, I'm not quite sure her role in Seed, but she's definitely doing a lot of good work with them. So you actually spoke to her and it encouraged you to talk about your story. And I think it is a really important story to talk about. It's a very important topic. Just to give some stats about it, 1.25 million people in the UK are suffering from an eating disorder as we sit here. It's probably a bit more in my opinion, but that's what the stats are saying. 75% are women, 25% are men. So it is a huge issue. It doesn't discriminate. It doesn't discriminate your age, your sex, your ethnicity, nothing. It doesn't discriminate at all. So you started working with Jemma and actually helped you actually get a bit more therapy right now at the middle of last year, because you found that you were getting really angry again. You were getting that goddamn eating disorder voice, which is, if anyone's ever had an eating disorder, you'll totally understand what we're talking about. But so that happened all last year. So I remember you started posting up some stuff last year. That's when I noticed anyway.
So it was literally, Jem got brought to my attention. Seed is actually run by Jem's mum and dad.
There we go.
And one of the main reasons I wanted to help them is Jem's mum and dad had set it up because there's support, not great support, but there's support for people with eating disorders. There's no support for the families.
Yep.
And there should be. because it hurts them just as much as it does everyone else. And they're constantly walking on eggshells. Like, can I say that? Can I not say that? Can I do this? Because like my dad, if I walk past my dad would like grab my chubby bits and go, pinching in, so we can sell you to butchers for thousands. But it were a joke. And it kind of changed everyone's viewpoints. So like, can't say that, it's going to upset her. Can't do that, it's going to upset her. What can I do best to support them? And there's no information on that.
Yep.
And Jem's mum and dad did that because they didn't have anyone when Jem was going through it.
Yeah.
And that's one of the main reasons I wanted to help them. They're just really nice people that have been there, done that, got the t-shirt, and want to help other people get the t-shirt too.
I think that's really, really important. And I think the thing is, though, when you're going through an eating disorder, so just from speaking to somebody who had an eating disorder, you feel really alone, but you're not alone. Your family's there with you, but they don't know what to say. They don't know how to help you. They don't know what's going to set you off or what's not going to set you off, because you do have massive mood swings. Like, you can attest to this. You get massive mood swings, and one moment you're okay, the next moment you're screaming down the house. Like, it's definitely a massive challenge. But it's something that I love the fact of being able to support the family, because if you can support the family, they can actually better support the person that's suffering as well. They can actually help them more, and giving that education to those parents. And I've always said, if you can get somebody in there, if you've had an eating disorder, somebody else have the therapy with you or their own version of therapy to understand how to support you better, it's going to make life a lot easier. And I love that. That's what Seed is doing.
Yeah, honestly, that's one of the main reasons I was like, that's fantastic. I'll be honest, before meeting Jem, I was like, eating disorder therapy is a load of tripe. Didn't work. It's crap. And then spoke to Jem and she was like, this is what we're trying to do. I was like, that's perfect. That's what it should have been like from the start. You can't, like you've said, it's a little voice that's constantly in your head and it's constantly there. It never goes away. But if you've got people in your household that understand that little voice and that you have that little voice and they know how to best deal with that little voice, it's far more, I'm sorry, but it's far more impactful than any therapy session would ever be.
Because let's be real, therapy is an hour a week sometimes, or maybe it depending if you're an inpatient, it might be for a period of time while you're in an inpatient. But then when you go home, you've got the same issues, right? If you look at the bulk of your time is spent in the family home while you're dealing with these eating disorders, and there's a small portion of time actually getting the therapy. So actually having the support on both ends, like, yeah, have the therapy, I absolutely agree with that, but then actually being able to support the family household and get everyone involved in that to have those conversations is really important. And I think that that's going to be way more impactful than just the therapy alone.
It takes away the power as well, doesn't it? Because
yeah.
There is no power to it, because it's completely eliminating that I don't want to have this conversation because I don't want to hurt that person. That person's been given enough information themselves to now not be hurt by that information.
Mm-hmm. And also, it gives you the permission to be vulnerable. I remember I didn't want anyone to know that I wasn't coping, because I was such a prideful person. I was like, I don't want anyone to know that I'm not coping. I don't want anyone to know that I have this issue. I don't want anyone to look at me differently. Mind you, though, I was about 5'9" at one stage, so I'm pretty sure everyone could tell that I was definitely having a huge issue there. But I didn't want anyone to talk about it. If someone did try to talk to me about it, I would just like, I don't have a problem. You have a problem. Like, I was like you. I was like a firecracker, just like, you lit me and I would go off. So having that family support, I agree, is absolutely super, super important. And I don't know, I'm going to ask you a really odd question, but I know you set up your own business that's going really well. I know you set it up in 2018, 2017, 18, 19. Okay, I'm so confused with all the years because 2020 did not happen. But you set up your own business, which is, again, very, very stressful. So how have you managed the stress of setting up a business? Look, I've set up my own business. I totally get it. Because typically when you are stressed or you're anxious, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, that's when you can get the tendencies to have an eating disorder, and that's when bad habits can come back into play as well. How have you been able to manage the stress of setting up your own business and managing the eating disorder, as well as everything else that has happened in your life that's led you to this point?
So I'll be honest, I'm from a sales background. So high-pressured working environments, kind of used to. When I did start seeing it becoming a problem, because I ran myself ragged, since setting up Social Gems, I've probably had burnout twice. But I've not said anything about it. I should have done. I tried to suffer in silence. tried to do it all and thought, you can do this. If you can't do this, you're crap. And then I got my therapist to help me deal with those little things, because I have managed to achieve it. I have not let the inside take over me, but there has been times where I have probably had a little bit of depression, probably linked to burning out, that I've tried to sweep under the carpet. Now I'm trying to manage me and my time better to ensure that I don't do that again. Because out of my career, I'd say I've probably had burnout about 12 times.
Yeah, I've had full burnout twice where I couldn't get out of bed, but I've definitely had other burnouts. Like I remember at university, I was 20 years old, and I was in hospital with kidney stones and I couldn't figure out why. And it was because I'd burnt out. Like I was just stressed. But burnout is I actually talk a lot about burnout because honestly, it's like a big portion of my story. But understanding, I came from a sales background as well, and a lot of the times what I had to learn was my limitations, and it wasn't because it wasn't understanding like how far I could go and like you haven't reached your limits. It was actually understanding you've exceeded your limits. You need to come back down a little bit. You don't need to be running 100 miles an hour every day, all day, and it's just not healthy. And it's that living in extremes. And I've met other people who's had a similar background, a similar, a story to mine, and they live in extremes. And it's being able to understand I can't live in extremes all the time. And it's being able to break that down and going, how am I, like waking up in the morning and being able to be really honest with yourself? How am I feeling today? How much energy do I have to give? Not the faux energy that we can muster up and just like, I'll get really stressed out, use my adrenaline as a fuel to get me from point A to point B, but actually going, how am I actually feeling? Like, where are my actual levels? Engaging, where am I physically at? Where am I mentally at? And where am I emotionally at? And being able to gauge how you want to work that day, that week, that month can be really, really helpful. And that's something that I had to learn the hard way multiple times. But yeah, burning out is not fun. It's not fun.
It's not. And exactly the same as you. I live in extremes, and it's trying to manage those extremes. It's only now that I've started to realize that I do that and get the help from that, because I'll go, I can do absolutely everything. And most people will say to me, how the hell do you fit all that in one day? And I'm like, some superwoman. I'm not Superwoman. I'm an idiot. And I just run myself into the ground.
I honestly, I always wake up to myself. I always look at my desk. I like to be busy. Now, you probably got the same thing. I like to be busy. It makes, I don't know why, I kind of get a little bit of a buzz out of it. But the problem is it's only so long that I can like to be busy for before it becomes a burden, and being able to understand I'm actually tipping over to this being a burden. That's actually not okay. I need to take a step back and slow down and actually kind of self-evaluate and going, what do I need to actually do to fill up my bucket that isn't just solely work? Because I think it's easy to do when you set up your business, make everything about work and make everything about growing that. And, if you've ever, I don't know if you've done this, but tying your self-worth and everything that you see yourself to your business is not healthy as well. And so learning to sort of go, I'm going to have a good month, I'm going to have a bad month in business, and that doesn't define who I am. And that can be freaking challenging.
I agree. Completely agree.
Yeah, so we've come to a full circle, but I really wanted to just sort of ask a couple more questions in regards to sort of where you are right now. I know you're getting some therapy right now, which I honestly, if anyone is still watching us talk about this, I really do highly recommend getting some therapy. I also want to say go check out Seed. They're doing some really, really cool stuff. They've just started getting some really good steam. Check out Jemma. I'm actually going to put all the links in down below as well. But what's next for you, Gem? I know that you've got the therapy going, but what's next for Social Gems, for you personally, for you and Charlie? Like, what's going on?
So Social Gems, we've gone from LinkedIn training and content creation. We now do all social media platforms. Charlie's just getting used to being back at school, to be fair. There's no pressure on him. He's a bit upset that he's not in the top set for maths anymore. But as I keep telling him, it'll come back. Everybody's had time off. It takes time. But if you want to get there, you will get there. Other than that, just surviving and learning how to understand me better.
I think that's going to be that's always, that's always the way it's going to be, always understanding yourself. I think that's a really important message. I've got to say, watching you grow Social Gems, because I'm a bit of a stalker. I've stalked you since day one, I'm pretty sure. I feel like you did some stuff with Chris Williams. I'm not quite sure if that's how you came onto my radar, and then I saw you doing some of your stuff with Social Gems. But it's been really nice to watch your content, because it's not shitty. It's actually just down to earth, and it's just you. And I really like all your content. So I love following you.
Oh, thank you. That's literally what we tell people as well. So it's all about just being yourself, and putting yourself out there as you, and people will like it. People buy people and not products. And unless you're allowing them to see who you are and what you're about, they're never going to buy into that.
Absolutely. And I know from my own journey, I remember when I first decided to call my business Get Your Shit Together, literally and figuratively. And I had so many people going, oh, you shouldn't do that. That's a terrible idea. And I was like, but it's who I am. It's what I want. And you just got to own it. You've got to own who you are as well. All right. Thank you so much, Jem, for coming on. So like I said, anyone that's watching, make sure you go check out Seed and Jemma Oaten, and Jemma Bevan if you're not following Jemma as well. But one final question, if you could give anyone that's listening right now one piece of advice to help them get their shit together, literally or figuratively, what would your advice be?
Get help, speak to a therapist, actually acknowledge that you're not okay. It's okay to not be okay, and it's okay to acknowledge that as well. If you acknowledge that, you can work on it. If you ignore it, it'll get worse.
Absolutely no truer words. The more you ignore it, the worse it's going to come. But if you can face it, it's going to make life a hell of a lot easier to manage. So thank you so much. So Jem, where can people find you and Social Gems if they are needing anything to do with content creating?
Where can you not find us is probably a better answer. We've got a website, we're on LinkedIn, we're on Twitter, Facebook, Insta, TikTok. We're even looking at Bizfluence at the minute, to be honest, just to see what it's about.
Bizfluence, never heard of it. I'll go check it out.
I'll send you a link after this.
Amazing. All right. Well, thank you so much, and thanks for everyone that's gotten involved. I've seen your comments. I will absolutely reply after this. But have an awesome afternoon, and I will be back again next week. So thank you so much, Jemma Bevan, for giving me an hour of your time.
You're welcome. Speak to you later.
All right. Bye.
Bye.